Welcome to Vigorous PEDs. I'm Coach Steve. Let's talk about 17 alpha-alkylated oral steroids and in which scenario they might be beneficial and which scenarios they shouldn't be used. Now, before we go into the 17 alpha-alkylated steroids, let's go over the non-17 alpha-alkylated steroids, which means they just pass freely through the liver and gets destroyed at the adequate pace. So, the main non-17 alpha-alkylated steroid that's being used is Proviron. Now, in my opinion, the only real scenario where you would want to use Proviron is during the first cycle, when your sexual hormone-binding globulin might be elevated, or when you've taken significant time off. Because even if you blast and cruise, your sexual hormone-binding globulin will not get that high, and there's no real reason to put Proviron into the sexual hormone-binding globulin and promote the freeing up of testosterone, increasing free testosterone levels, which helps with sex drive and maybe positive aggression. So when your sexual hormone-binding globulin is already middle of the range, or maybe even bottom of the range, Proviron is pretty useless. And you gotta remember, and homework for you guys who still haven't caught up to this latest information, there's a receptor called the sex hormone-binding globulin receptor complex. So you have sexual hormone-binding globulin, there's hormones that attach or bind to the sexual hormone-binding globulin and then transport through the blood. Now, there's no hormone in the body that's active in the blood. So whether it gets transported with albumin, the sexual hormone-binding globulin, or gets esterified into something like DHA sulfate, it's completely non-bioavailable in the blood. It has to attach to an androgen receptor. Now, free testosterone, okay, great. It attaches to the androgen receptors in the brain. But some of the testosterone needs to get delivered to tissue through the sexual hormone-binding globulin receptor complex. And that attaches or activates the androgen receptor in the nuclei through a different pathway, similar to how the estrogen receptor works, by basically upregulating the androgen receptor when there's a sufficient amount of estrogen in the bloodstream, allowing to attach to the estrogen receptor. So, don't assume that high levels of free testosterone and low levels of sexual hormone-binding globulin are going to give you any significant amount of gains. Just because your sex drive is high, you feel, you're in a constant good mood, it doesn't mean you're going to get more gains. Yeah, the sexual hormone-binding receptor complex still contributes to some of your progress, recovery, muscle synthesis, anabolism, protein synthesis, etc. The sexual hormone-binding globulin receptor complex contributes to everything that we enjoy in bodybuilding, so you don't have to crush it too low by taking excessive amount of Proviron. So there's basically, in my opinion, there's only one scenario, two scenarios where you would want to take it. 25 milligrams at the kickstart of a cycle. Forget about the D-bell kickstart. You might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of Proviron just to reduce your sexual hormone-binding globulin into a favorable range. Let's say middle of this of the reference range, and beyond that, Proviron is kind of useless because you still need sexual hormone-binding globulin to deliver the testosterone and the nandrolone and the boldenone and the trenbolone and whatever hormones you're taking to tissue and activate the androgen receptor through a different pathway. So, you can forget about Proviron unless you're starting your first cycle. DHEA, non-17 alpha-alkylated. DHEA and pregnenolone, both are a very good part of a hormone replacement therapy protocol because you take testosterone, the adrenals might reduce the production of DHEA and pregnenolone, so you supplement that on top, simply because your HPTA is shut down by taking exogenous hormones like testosterone, so you take 100, 150, 200, 250, or whatever your hormone replacement dose of testosterone is. Some people see a reduction in their DHEA, some people do not. An easy blood test will tell you what's going on inside of your body. If your DHEA and pregnenolone is low, like was in my case, a replacement dose, 10 milligrams pregnenolone, 25 milligrams of DHEA per day, will give you a similar ratio from testosterone to estrogen to DHEA and pregnenolone without the use of AI. Yeah? And then your libido should be just as good as those couple days you were on Proviron. You got to remember, the funny thing is, to bring it back to Proviron, the funny thing is, with Proviron, it will bring your sexual hormone-binding globulin down, right? And your sex drive goes up. You're like, yeah, it's really working. And then sexual hormone-binding globulin keeps declining until single digits, and now your sex drive is gone. And people are like, oh, but I'm taking Proviron. My sex drive should be sky high. They add more Proviron. What happens is the sexual hormone-binding globulin goes even lower. And your sex drive is even worse. So, you got too excited And now you have to look to a different way, look into increasing your estrogen levels, taking ACG to bring your hormone levels back to favorable ranges. Again, it's a cluster of overdoing it, basically. And that was unfortunately self-induced by the lack of information. And now you have the information, so you don't have to make that same mistake again. Proviron, couple weeks. DHA and pregnenolone in hormone replacement scenarios. Now, I prefer to take that during the cycle as well, simply because of the favorable hormone ratio, and that contributes to libido, well-being, a couple of cognitive benefits, helping with focus and memory from the pregnenolone. So I keep those in at all times because my adrenals simply don't produce enough DHA and pregnenolone anymore after blasting and cruising for several years. Yeah? Now, for those of you guys that didn't know, aromasin and aldactone are also oral steroids. Aromasin goes into the aromatase enzyme and gets stuck, simply because of its chemical structure. And that's why it's called a suicide inhibitor, because it gets stuck in the aromatase enzyme, and now the aromatase enzyme is completely useless. Yeah? It can't convert testosterone to estrogen anymore, or Anadrol to estrogen, or Dianabol to estrogen, or methyl estrogen, I think that what it converts into. So the aromatase enzyme is completely useless. Yeah, you basically put something inside. Don't get naughty. You put something inside, and it's stuck. And now it has to be metabolized out because it's no longer useful. So that's how you lose the aromasin, and you lose the aromatase enzyme through the pathway of metabolization. That's the scenario where we use aromasin in. Again, not 7-alpha alkylated, but the chemical structure, when you look at it, most of you will probably not be able to differentiate between aromasin and testosterone, unless you've looked at a decent amount of chemical structures in your life. So, aromasin we use as an aromatase inhibitor. It's very beneficial to keep your HDL in range, your estrogen in range, again, in a dose-dependent fashion. And, the key is to not overdo it unless you're doing a contest prep, because estrogen has a myriad of benefits, which we'll discuss in a separate video. So again, you dose your aromasin based on the amount of aromatizable compounds you take, and then you're going to have to confirm with blood work. So every time you make a change to your testosterone dose or your Dianabol dose or whatever compound you're taking that can aromatize into estrogen, 4 weeks is usually a solid time to assess if your estrogen increased. Now, you do your blood work, you check your estrogen, maybe your estrone and high sensitivity estrogen check, just to be 100% sure where your estradiol is at, and then you adjust your aromasin dose. Yeah? Again, it's an oral steroid, so that's why we're talking about this in this oral steroid video. And the last non-17-alpha alkylated steroid is aldactone. Now, aldactone is not an oral steroid. It's mostly closely related to a corticosteroid, so more the cortisol part, the progesterone, aldactone, cortisol section of the hormone scale and hormone cascade. Aldactone can displace aldosterone. Aldosterone is something that regulates sodium excretion in the kidneys. So by taking aldactone, you can actually lower or downregulate your aldosterone levels and promote sodium excretion because it blocks the aldosterone receptor. Now, aldactone, I know it's very close. So if I misspeak somewhere, I'm sorry. Aldactone is the one you take orally. Aldactone blocks the aldosterone receptor, and aldactone also attaches to the androgen receptor and blocks the attachment of real androgens like testosterone or DHE or other hormones that you're taking. So women prefer to use aldactone off-label against hormonal acne. By blocking the androgen receptors in their body, they don't get acne, which is caused by hormonal changes. So that's an off-label use, and even some of the doctors, depending on the country of residence that you are, they will prescribe aldactone under the name of spirolactone as an acne medication for women. Now, most of the bodybuilders will use aldactone during contest prep or before a photo shoot simply to bring the aldosterone or down-regulate the aldosterone levels to make sure sodium excretion is very, very high. Now, an experienced coach will say, you can only use aldactone for 3 days because after 3 days, the anti-androgenic effect, by blocking the androgen receptor, becomes too great and you lose the visual density, the hardness, the shape, because you're blocking, by taking aldactone, you're blocking the androgens that you're taking to look hard and dense and vascular, that kind of stuff. So the maximum duration that you would want to take aldactone to lower subcutaneous water retention, by example, by promoting sodium excretion, is 3 days. I usually would recommend it around flying. So let's say you fly 1 week before the show. You might take it for a couple of days before the flight. You're off it again. And then if you need to peak for the contest, you might use it for 1 or 2 days. Again, if you're super shredded, 1 day is enough. That's enough. You might want to use it again post-contest, because post-contest, most guys are going to eat pretty shitty. You know, the pizza and donuts and hamburgers and sodium-ridden foods. Aldosterone levels go sky high. Another look like a water balloon. So you take aldactone to kind of promote the sodium excretion for a couple more days, while the bodybuilder that's freshly off the stage is trying to get his diet under control again. And once the diet is under control, you can take the aldactone out. And now they didn't have a horrible rebound post-contest. Yeah. So I know there's a video about 17-alpha-alkylated steroids, but I just thought I put those other non-17-alpha-alkylated steroids in there so you guys can get an overview. So my favorite of all the 17-alpha-alkylated steroids is Anavar. Yeah. The key is getting real Anavar and not fake Anavar, which is actually Dianabol and Turinabol or Winstrol or a combination of those, because the powders are so much cheaper. So Anavar is predominantly metabolized in the kidneys. So you might see on your liver enzymes that they're lower compared to other oral steroids. Now, the downside of Anavar is that it is metabolized in the kidneys and could potentiate some kidney stress. And the weird thing is, there's no scientific evidence that Anavar, under pharmaceutical conditions, promotes kidney stress. At least not in the sense that Trembolone or Nandrolone or Boldenone can cause, by attacking nephrons and causing a little bit of, toxicity in that area. So you don't see that clinically with Anavar. Well, what I've seen in blood work with clients that have been taking steroids for a while is that once they add in Anavar, blood shows up in the urine. So something is definitely going on in the kidneys. Although they don't take Anavar, they're perfectly healthy. There's no protein in the urine. There's no ketones, no blood sugar, no blood, no red blood cells. And then as soon as they take Anavar, the creatinine is in range, their cystatin C is in range. They got on the 24-hour urine check, their globular filtration rate is around 100%. And then as soon as they put Anavar into the mix, blood in the urine. That's a little bit too risky, a little bit too scary for comfort. So those guys are never on Anavar. But for the guys who don't have any kidney issues, you don't see any adverse effects on their blood work, and that hasn't been shown in the clinical studies. Now, Anavar will still increase your liver enzymes because since you're taking it orally, you're digesting it, it passes into the liver once. It's 17-alpha-alkylated, so it prevents breakdown in the kidney, in the liver. Yeah, not the kidneys, the liver. On the first pass. But the hepatocytes will still get destroyed just the same way. Yeah, so the oral steroids and all the other 17-alpha-alkylated steroids will go into the liver, go into the hepatocyte. The hepatocyte and the enzymes will try to break down, metabolize all, into other metabolites for excretion. But it's 17-alpha-alkylated, so that process doesn't really work. The hepatocyte gets destroyed, and your liver enzymes go up. Yeah, the cell gets broken down, the Anavar and the liver enzymes, the aminotransferases, enter the bloodstream, and you'll see that by the pumps you would expect, in the anabolism you would expect, and then you do your blood work, and your liver enzymes are elevated also. Yeah, if you were to take injectable Anavar, you wouldn't see this increased liver enzymes because now you're entering into the muscle depot, for example, and you're preventing the first pass through the liver by taking it orally. And that's the case for all oral steroids. If you take oral steroids through the injection route, so compared to oral Winstrol compared to injectable Winstrol will yield more bioavailable milligram for milligram, potentiate more effect. But the liver enzymes are lower because you're using a different administration route. Yeah. So with Anavar, the first pass it goes to the liver just for hepatocytes, and your liver enzymes go up, and then it gets metabolized in the liver. So compared to an oral Dianabol or an oral Anadrol, which gets metabolized in the liver twice, on the first pass and the second pass, your liver enzymes with Anavar will not go up significantly compared to the other oral steroids because the second time it gets metabolized in the liver. But since it still passes the liver, and that's where most of the cholesterol comes from, your cholesterol levels will still change. Yeah? Your total cholesterol might go up, your LDL might go up, and your HDL will go down. Why? Because, look at it this way, LDL transports triglycerides and cholesterol to tissue, but Anavar attaches to the tissue and the other oral steroids attach to the tissue, increasing cholesterol production not only in the liver, but in the tissue as well. Cholesterol levels in the tissue are saturated. Now, the LDL that transports cholesterol from the tissue, from the liver into the tissue, gets rejected because, hey, bro, I'm full with cholesterol. Take that shit somewhere else. And it keeps floating around in the blood. And the downside is, since the HDL is also produced in the liver, but the liver is saturated, and all the tissue is saturated with cholesterol, the liver will automatically downregulate the HDL production because the HDL takes cholesterol from the tissue down to the liver. And then it gets excreted. So, golden rule for every oral steroid that you take. Fiber needs to go up. You might want to consider TUDCA, which increases bile flow and the detoxification of liver enzymes and cholesterol into the intestinal tract. And if you're on a carnivore diet, that just gets reabsorbed because you have no fiber for it to bind to. So make sure you have adequate fiber in your diet from a psyllium husk or vegetables or sweet potato, oatmeal, and there's plenty of fiber sources out there. You don't need to take it as a supplement. Make sure you get 30, 40, 50, maybe even 80 grams of fiber per day, depending on how much your stomach and how much other food you're eating. Then the bile acid has something to bind to, and that prevents reabsorption of the cholesterol and liver enzymes, which then keep your blood levels elevated. Yeah? So you want the detoxification process of everything that you're producing extra by taking oral steroids to be excreted sufficiently. Yeah? TUDCA helps by increasing bile flow. NAC helps by actually protecting the hepatocytes from destruction. So that lowers liver enzymes in a different pathway. And then, of course, fiber. And that can come from either vegetables, a supplement form, or whatever's contained in your carbohydrate sources. Yeah. Now, I don't really believe in silymarin and liver 52 and some of the other herbal supplements. Silymarin has been shown to block the androgen receptor as well, similar to how aldactone works. And liver 52, it's only been shown to get help against alcoholic liver disease. And if you're a bodybuilder, you shouldn't be an alcoholic. You shouldn't abuse oral steroids to the point you get fatty liver disease either. Yeah, there's a limited duration when you take oral steroids for the situation that you feel is beneficial. Yeah, and in the end, you have to go by blood work because some of the 17 alpha alkylated steroids will ruin your blood work way faster than other ones, and it also works in a dose-dependent fashion. So 5 milligrams of Anavar that only passes the liver once and gets metabolized into the kidneys, or through the kidneys, it doesn't raise your liver enzymes and destroys hepatocytes and changes your lipid level as much as 2 weeks on 40 milligrams of halotestin. Yeah, that's pretty liver toxic. So let's go over Anavar, when you would want to use it. For women, probably a low dose for a very long time because you don't want too much androgenic side effects. And, since the muscle building process is pretty slow, you take the lowest effective dose of 2.5 milligrams, maybe 5 milligrams per day, and you run that throughout your off season and during the contest prep. And at one point during the contest prep, that dose might go up because your calories are depleted and you need a little bit more androgenic incentive to keep all the muscle that you've built in a calorie surplus. And for men, probably below 8% body fat. Yeah, when you feel your strength is declining, you're competing, you're in calorie deficit, you want to keep that muscle mass and your strength and your mind-muscle connection going. And in that case, if you've got real Anavar, 25 milligrams is more than enough. If you can run 50 milligrams of Anavar or more, I got news for you. It's not real Anavar. It's not real Anavar. I don't care how big you are. More than 25 milligrams. That's all I can run. 25 milligram, and I'm pumped and locked, and everything's tight. And no more than that. Yeah, that's. I don't see a reason why you would want to go above 25 milligrams per day. So when you're not in shape, not during contest prep, Turinabol is a suitable alternative for Anavar because it doesn't aromatize. Anavar doesn't aromatize to estrogen, and Turinabol doesn't do that either. So when you're a little bit higher body fat, And you want to still want to get, a little bit of anabolism, a little bit of mind-muscle connection. You don't want to get too much cholesterol changes, not too much liver enzyme changes, and not too much water retention during your off-season. Then Turinabol is a suitable alternative. Now, some people notice that they get a little bit of a stamina boost. I'm not exactly sure on which pathway that is because Turinabol is not known to increase EPO levels or red blood cell count. It could be by blocking the cortical receptors, the same as Halotestin does. We'll get to that later. By blocking the corticoid receptors on muscle tissue, you prevent some of the breakdown and then, the binding that cortisol does post-workout. So, could be that Turinabol blocks that process. I know that Halotestin does that. It works through blocking the cortical receptors, and then, that's why usually you take Halotestin in a severe calorie deficit before the show, because it doesn't matter how stressed and how much cortisol levels are in your blood. Halotestin will block it, and it doesn't really matter. Yeah, we'll just keep you energetic and keep your muscle building process going, and there's no form of catabolism that lasts 2 weeks, and that's why you end up so hard, dry, and veiny. Right, back to Turinabol. I know I'm all over the place, but everything's related. And I'm just going to throw it out there, and you guys can decipher it towards the end. And otherwise, shameless plug, in my Facebook group, I got an article about Anavar, Turinabol, Proviron, Aldactone and diuretic use, Halotestin, check drop, Superdrol, Anadrol. I got it all. Yeah, so you can find all the details right there, and the cost of my private Facebook group are down in the description field, in case you're interested. So, Turinabol is a suitable alternative for Anavar in the off-season. Dosages will depend on how strong you want to get. It's not as androgenic, not as anabolic as Anavar, obviously, milligram for milligram. So you might end up at 50 milligrams per day. Again, most of the anabolism should come from your injectables, whether that's a testosterone, a primo, nandrolone, boldenone, whatever you prefer to use. The Turinabol is something you take on top for a duration of time where your blood work is still in range. Now, some of the guys during the off-season, they want a little bit more pump than Turinabol can give. They don't mind the water retention. They want to get a better mind-muscle connection milligram for milligram. And they want a little bit of the anabolism that you can get from methyl estrogen. Yeah, that's what Dianabol converts into. So they take Dianabol instead during the off-season. They get a bigger pump, a little bit more volumization, obviously more water retention, and perhaps more estrogenic side effects, which you can easily mitigate with Aromacin and perhaps an Novodex to block it if it goes really out of control. So Dianabol, from a strength and training perspective compared to Turinabol, is more enjoyable. But you'll have to deal with more of the side effects like the water retention and the estrogen conversion. Yeah. Now, I think most of the old school guys will confirm that there's nothing like a Dianabol pump. And I'm going to have to say I agree. Training biceps or chest or back or anything upper body is a lot of fun on Dianabol. Unfortunately, it increases blood pressure as well. So when you reach into the heavy weights and you start doing leg presses, heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, crazy heavy weight, and you're not controlling your blood pressure correctly, then the Dianabol might be a little bit too strong because, again, I'm sure everybody's noticed, you max out the leg press, and on the way down, the lower the weight goes, the redder your face gets. And that's the blood pressure, and it's definitely something that Dianabol causes. Now, I think I talked about blood pressure in several other videos, so you got Cialis and ACE inhibitors and ARBs and electrolyte management and all that stuff. Yeah, you'll have to figure out a way to get that under control. If you can't get it under control, Dianabol and Anadrol are not for you. Yeah, because the blood pressure increases might be too severe for you to control, and no amount of muscle gain that you would get from these compounds warrants the pressure you put on your kidneys by increasing blood pressure. Yeah, that's just the message and full disclaimer here. Again, you're going to have to outweigh what is more important to you. And if some of the side effects are too much or uncontrollable or unmanageable, just don't take it. Yeah, there's a million other options. That's why we're going over all the oral steroids, the 17-alpha alkylated and the non-17-alpha alkylated, which basically uses an ancillary, right? The 17-alpha alkylated are going to be the main oral steroid that you take, and the non-17 alpha alkylated are just basically taken on a case-by-case scenario as a goodie on top, a little sprinkle on cake, basically. You don't take those in high dosages. It's completely unnecessary. So Dianabol you would mostly want to use in the off-season when water retention and, pumps from high carbohydrate diet are beneficial, right, for the anabolism and the recovery, etc. Some people like to use Dianabol during the carb loading process. I've never really experimented with that because, again, Dianabol still converts into estrogen. And even though during contest prep, in carb loading at the end, you're probably on a myriad of aromatase inhibitors like letrozole or high-dose Arimidex to prevent estrogen conversion, you might still get a little bit of estrogen conversion. That's why I prefer to use Anadrol in that sense. It's a good segue, right? Try to segue everything into the other oral steroids, so just bear with me here. So with Anadrol, even though it's one of the few oral steroids that can actually attach to the estrogen receptor, you don't get as much estrogenic side effects compared to a Dianabol, which converts into estrogen or methyl-estrogen, where you will see that the estrogenic side effects might be unbearable or you get too much subcutaneous water retention. So pre-contest, if you decide to take Anadrol for the sake of carbohydrate loading, right, to load electrolytes in fullness, maintain your electrolyte balance intercellularly, promote potassium storage and cell volumization while the carbs are being loaded, 2 days, 3 days of Anadrol doesn't promote water retention. But you'll see that on the 4th, 5th, and definitely after the 1 week, is that Anadrol will start to promote a decent amount of subcutaneous water retention. Again, it promotes retention of minerals in the muscle cell first. Once that's saturated, then it starts promoting water retention in the subcutaneous and extracellular space. So there's a very short window where you can use Anadrol pre-contest or pre-photo shoot, and you'll have to experiment. I've got a couple clients who actually get leaner and harder and fuller and drier within a week of Anadrol use, so they can run it the entire week leading up to a contest, and some guys only 2 days. So you'll have to experiment. And the only way you can actually see the difference is when you're 6% body fat or lower, because the water retention is so minuscule that you wouldn't see it at a higher body fat level. So if you're 12% and after 3 days, you're like, I still look the same. But if you're 6%, that water retention would be very noticeable. And the only way you really see it is when you step on stage. And I'm sure you've seen a couple guys come off on the Olympic stage or any other bodybuilding contest. Backstage, they look full, dry, and hard. They step on stage and they're completely washed over. That's 1 day of Anadrol too long. Or they spill over with carbohydrates. Either or. Usually with the carbohydrates, you can see with the distension and, their abs are completely glazed over, but they're still hard in other places. Whereas with the Anadrol, they're just completely glazed over because the extracellular space is holding so much water. And that's Anadrol. Still, I prefer it in the off-season when strength and muscle size and pumps and glycogen and carbohydrate intake is at an all-time high. Downside of Anadrol is that it's probably the most suppressive on your appetite. Superdrol and Halotestin, which we'll get into, also suppress your appetite. But you can run Anadrol a little bit longer. So if you have to go by duration, not in a dose-dependent way, but let's go by duration. With Anadrol, after 4 weeks, you can't eat. Superdrol, 2 weeks, and Halotestin, maybe a week. But then you're stubborn, you still push it further. This is bodybuilding, right? This is competitive bodybuilding. So with Anadrol, you might be able to push it 6 weeks even, Like for me, my appetite doesn't really get destroyed. I notice that I don't feel as eating as much. So it makes eating in a calorie surplus a little bit more difficult, but I can still eat. I can still digest. I don't get any weird gastrointestinal upset or that kind of stuff. And then, honestly, I've never run it past 6 weeks because, you do a blood work and your liver enzymes are in the hundreds. And that's, and then I'm like, okay, I got big, I got hard, I got strong. It's time to come off. Yeah? And then you let your liver enzymes come back into range with TUDCA and NAC and fiber and just taking some time off of anything that passes your liver twice. Yeah? You can go by time on, time off. If you do fasting, the video that I recorded previously was about fasting. You see how fast my liver enzymes come back into range. So you let your orals metabolize, you fast, And then maybe in 2 weeks, your liver enzymes are back into range again. Again, it's very dependent on what you did and what else you're doing that is increasing your liver enzyme. Yeah. So Anadrol off season, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams per day. This is one of those orals that people run in pretty high dosages. You got to remember that Anadrol is used medically to, in anemic scenarios, and it does increase red blood cell count. So you got to remember that red blood cells get produced 60 days, 90 days. That's about their lifespan. So if you run Anadrol for 6 weeks, for example, at 50 milligrams per day, or maybe 3 weeks on 50 and 3 weeks on 100 milligrams, your hematocrit and red blood cell count will be elevated. Yeah? So again, make sure you do your blood work, and you might have to do a donation at the end or even during the time that you're taking Anadrol, because it promotes so much red blood cell production. Yeah, and especially if you combine it with boldenone or primobolan, which are also known to increase red blood cell production. Yeah, keep track of this, guys, because all these things contribute and factor in, and especially if you're taking a lot of iron, from beef, and your vitamin B's are sky high, you have even more building blocks to produce red blood cells. So keep track of that. Yeah, if you're eating a lot of beef, if you're getting a lot of B vitamins, if you're taking boldenone and primobolan on top of your Anadrol, or you take your Anadrol on top of your boldenone and primobolan, right? That's your base, and the oral is a goodie on top. Red blood cell count, go check it every 4 weeks, before, during, and after. Yeah? Don't be stubborn, and find a way. Before you start Anadrol, find a place where you can donate, because it's not easy. It's not easy to get a donation sometimes. It's not easy to do a therapeutic phlebotomy, not lobotomy. I might need a lobotomy after this video. So get that in order before you start Anadrol, because the last thing you want to do is do it yourself. That's all I'm going to say about it. So that's Anadrol off the menu. If you notice a loss of appetite, just discontinue it. Your appetite should return in a couple of days, especially if you're on TEDCA, which increases bowel flow and detoxifies your liver as fast as possible into the intestinal tract, and then it goes into the bathroom. And that brings us to Superdrol, which is one of the few pro-hormones which actually has some sort of application nowadays. All the other pro-hormones are kind of useless, and nobody actually uses them anymore, besides aromasin, which is technically a pro-hormone, right? So aromasin got FDA approved, used as an aromatase inhibitor, and Superdrol didn't get FDA approved, but it's still readily available and used, at the end of a training block during the off season to push past the strength plateau, or as part of a contest prep at the end where you're trying to increase size and strength and hardness, leading into the contest for the best possible look. Now, the difference between Superdrol and Anadrol is that Superdrol you can run 2 weeks before the contest, and Anadrol probably only 2, 3, maybe even 5 days, maybe 7 days, if you're genetically inclined to do so. Because the water retention you get from Anadrol is still going to spill over into the subcutaneous space, making you look watery. And with Superdrol, you don't get that. Now, the funny thing is, Anadrol, Superdrol, and Masteron were all developed at the same time. They found medical application for Anadrol, for anemic scenarios where red blood cell count is low. Masteron against breast cancer, which has already been replaced with tamoxifen and other medical treatments, because those don't have any androgenic side effects like Masteron does, especially in women, because breast cancer is mostly found in women, and women taking Masteron for the sake of reducing breast cancer might lead to some androgenic side effects. So, Superdrol was not found to have any specific medical application, but it's still being used by bodybuilders to increase fullness, hardness, density, etc. You don't have to risk, or you don't have to worry about subcutaneous water retention, because that's not the case with Superdrol, because it potentiates some of the effects that you would expect from Masteron and some of the fullness you would expect from Anadrol, making it ideal in that circumstance. Now, when you look at the liver enzymes, Superdrol will probably push your liver enzymes twice as high as Anadrol does in a milligram for milligram basis in half the time. So 2 weeks on Anadrol, 40 milligrams, your liver enzymes will be like 150 to 200, which will be the same at 50 milligrams, maybe even 100 milligrams of Anadrol after 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah? I've got blood work on everything. And Superdrol is definitely something that after 2 weeks you feel it. You feel your liver and you feel a little bit toxic. So again, there's limited application for Superdrol. 2 weeks leading into a contest when there's something to win, something on the line, a pro card or prize money or a reputation to uphold. In that scenario, it has benefits, right? The other benefit would be to push past the strength plateau. Let's say it's the same reason why you would want to use Anadrol. You're at the end of the off season. You're already scheduling a deload in like 4 weeks or 6 weeks. You know that you've reached the absolute max of your food intake, but you still want to gain a little bit more strength and a little bit more size. Superdrol on top, Anadrol on top for the short amount of time that you're able to push past that strength plateau and your appetite isn't reduced. And once your appetite is reduced, you go off orals, you take your deload, you take a little bit of a mini cut, resensitize your insulin receptors, drop a little bit of water weight and all the bloat you've built up during the off season. And then your liver enzymes should be good again, to solidify the muscle that you built while you were taking oral steroids in a calorie surplus. Man, such a mouthful. And again, it's really depending on the scenario, and that's why we got coaches to guide people through those processes. You could do the same with halotestin, but honestly, I think the only real application there is again, pre-contest. If you're really, really low body fat levels, the androgenicity and the blocking of the cortisol receptors, you really see the difference at 4% body fat. But even at 6% body fat, and the guys that didn't compete that long, you might not see a difference cosmetically. I mean, you'll see a difference in liver enzymes, that's for sure. And your gamma GT levels will be sky high as well. So in most cases, halotestin, I don't think it's really useful unless you're a veteran competitor. You understand your body. You get into that really low body fat percentage where you actually see a noticeable difference, and you absolutely understand your body and know how to train those last 2 weeks, because it's such a strong androgen, and it will really tickle your aggression center in the brain. Is that some people overdo it and then they start tearing something, or they overdo it in traffic or against their partner or the kids or whatever situation they get, that they get a little bit irritated. They overdo it there, and they, after the show, nobody wants to go out with them anymore because they got so aggressive. Or they're simply not low body fat enough to really see the difference. So you might, during those last 2 weeks, if you know your body, you know how hard you can push during the training without tearing yourself apart, then halotestin is definitely a suitable oral steroid to use in that scenario. But you got to remember, if you're also on Winstrol during this time, injectable Winstrol, which will dry out the joints and, put your whole body into a compromising position, and then you add halotestin on top, which increases your strength and your aggression levels, and then, for some whatever weird reason, you start feeling like doing personal bests during those last 2 weeks, you got to control yourself, because you will tear yourself apart. And I've seen that happen a couple times where the guys, they're at sub 5% body fat levels, then they add the halotestin in, and it's like they wake up from this contest prep. You're phasing the cardio out. You might increase the calories a little bit to really feed into the contest and grow into it. And they're waking up from this calorie deprived state. Their androgen levels go up. They get a little bit of aggressive. The weights are finally moving again. They get a great pump. And then it's one rep too many and it's over. They break something. It happens. So you really got to know your body and learn how to control everything before you're a suitable candidate for halotestin. Because it's really one of those compounds that will push you over the edge, whether that's in the gym or outside of the gym. So it comes with a long laundry list of a disclaimer before you're ready to use that. And that pretty much ends this video for all the 17 alpha alkylated steroids and when to use them and which scenarios there's a better alternative. Again, these are not golden rules. Some people like to use halotestin at the beginning of a contest prep, which has some applications. Some people like to use Anadrol when they're super lean, to reduce appetite, and the water retention they'll take, away with diuretic or manipulation of the carbohydrates. So there's always multiple applications, but generally speaking, these 17 alpha-alkylated steroids are used under these scenarios. And, you know, if you find a reason why you would want to use them in a different scenario, you found a different way to use them, which gave you some benefit, please share it in the comment fields. It's a learning experience for everybody. I just use them, you know, based on the blood work results and the changes physiologically that I've seen over the years. I usually use them in these scenarios and recommend in these scenarios for my clients. Sometimes you'll want to experiment a little bit during the off season. So let's say you don't have any experience with Anavar. You're a little bit fat. You're 12%, 50% body fat in the off season. You try it for 2 weeks to see what happens. See how your mind-muscle connection, see how the cosmetic changes are, your strength increases, and the cosmetic changes that occur. Okay, you try it for 2 weeks. If you're satisfied, you keep that Anavar in the cabinet because you know it's good. And then you keep it for the time that you're actually 8% body fat or lower, where the cosmetic changes are more apparent. And, you know, lower milligram dosages gives you better results compared to in the off season, where you probably just want to use an Anadrol or D-ball because you're completely glazed over with carbohydrates. Like right now, I'm, 10% body fat, maybe 15, somewhere in between, you know, depending on how much water I'm holding. I wouldn't use Anavar right now. I think it's a waste of money. And before I forget, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I mean, this kind of content is not really monetizable. So if you like it, if you enjoyed it, if you learned something new, do me a favor. Press that like button. Press the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. Leave a comment for the algorithm. It helps out the growth of the channel. I mean, I can't, it's barely monetizable, this kind of content, but I know you guys want to see about the PEDs and the, you know, the spicy stuff that, unfortunately won't get you any, income. So a like goes a long way. A comment goes a long way. Subscribe with the notification bell button and, you know, put it to all notification. That goes a long way too. Helps me out. I'm trying to help you guys out too, to make sure that you get all the information that you need to have before you start taking any of these PEDs that I mentioned in this video. So help me out, guys. It helps the channel grow. Thanks, guys, so much. Hope that helps, guys. Let me know what you think about all these oral steroids in the comment fields. Let's get a discussion going. If you learned something new, let me know as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.